Hey everybody, I'm Laurie Hernandez and this is One Mind Brainwaves. Today's topic, the food-brain connection. We'll be talking with two experts in nutritional psychiatry who study the science of food and how diet can affect brain health. Their findings are fascinating. And stick around. Later in the program, we'll check in with our team at One Mind Cyber Guide for a review of their mental health app pick of the week. But first, we're excited to have with us Dr. Drew Ramsey. He's an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. He's the founder of the Brain Food Clinic in New York City and also the author of several books, including Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. We're also welcoming Dr. Chris Palmer. He is the director of the Department of Postgraduate and Continuing Education at McLean Hospital and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, where his work focuses on metabolism, metabolic disorders, and mental health. Viewers, feel free to post questions or comments for our guests at any time. Drew and Chris, welcome to Brainwaves.
Thank you, Laurie. It's great to be here.
Thank you, Laurie.
Okay.
It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Drew, actually, let me start with you. Nutritional psychiatry is getting a lot of attention these days. What do we know about consuming specific foods or food groups to boost mental health and well-being? And is there enough scientific evidence to say with any certainty?
I think there's enough evidence to say with certainty that food really affects your brain health and your mental health. I think that's very certain at this point. And I think increasingly we understand that food is a major lever that we can manipulate and use to help patients get better. The data has really been pouring in, as you said, ranging from studies now using interventional trials to use Mediterranean-style diets to help patients with depression and showing really good outcomes. So that's very exciting. We also know that even beyond all the research and science, there's just something foundational about using food as a using nutrition as an intervention, in the sense that so many folks are struggling with how they eat. We're seeing that often in the stats about diabetes and obesity in America. But I think what Dr. Palmer and I are intrigued by and excited about is the huge public health impact that nutrition can have on mental health.
Yeah. Chris, what do you say when you hear people talk about reaching for comfort foods like donuts and hamburgers? For me, that would be bread and butter. Every time I discover that bread and butter exists, it seems that all my problems go away for about 30 seconds. It's wonderful. But what do you say when you hear people talking about reaching for comfort foods when they feel depressed?
So I would say it's really common and you're not alone, and welcome to the human species. So, humans have eaten comfort foods, whatever we define as comfort foods, for centuries, when we are stressed in particular. Parents give their kids comfort foods when they're sick. And so it is not anything new or special to kind of recognize that we all eat comfort foods. One of the fascinating things about doing this work is that the science is finally catching up enough for us to be able to explain exactly what's happening in the brain and what's happening in the body that might explain why people do that. That, this is something that people have observed and everybody kind of knows that it's just common sense, but most people think it's a matter of willpower or it's a matter of discipline. Like if you're depressed and you want to eat chocolate, just stop and you should be fine. And in fact, it's actually not so simple for most people to just stop. And we actually, as Drew mentioned, there are lots of pathways in which the food and diet affect your overall health and affect your brain health. So I'll just mention one easy one that's really easy to understand. Insulin resistance. We actually now have a lot of evidence that insulin has a powerful effect on the brain and the way the brain functions, and plays a role in our moods, possibly in psychosis, in Alzheimer's disease, and even in feeding behavior, appetite, those types of things. And when your cells are insulin resistant in the brain, it means that those brain cells aren't getting enough energy. And there's a really easy way to fix that in the short run, and it's by eating a lot of junk food. Because when you eat a lot of junk food, you get a surge of insulin and you get a surge of glucose, and that fuels those cells temporarily. And so people can feel better in the moment. The problem with eating a lot of junk food over time is that makes your insulin resistance even worse. So although it's a short-term fix, it can make your problems worse in the long run.
And I'm assuming that kind of answers it, but just to keep things round, why might those foods initially make us feel good, but are not so good for brain health?
So along those lines, they might make us feel good because they give you a surge of insulin and a surge of glucose, which help fuel those underfueled cells. But in the long run, that actually makes those cells even more insulin resistant, which just makes the problem even worse. Makes you gain weight, it increases levels of inflammation, it changes your gut microbiome adversely, it does all sorts of things that are just everybody kind of already knows, not good for you.
Drew, we also hear a lot about the microbiome. What is the microbiome? And am I pronouncing that right? How is it shaped by what we eat, and what roles does it play in brain health?
It's a great question. We can't have a conversation about brain health and nutrition in 2021 without saying the word microbiome. That's how you pronounce it, Laurie. And you have one. Everyone has one. The microbiome is the collection of all of the organisms in your gut, mostly in your colon. We mostly focus on the bacteria, but there's lots of stuff living down there. And the idea is that there are different both species of bacteria, but also different genes in certain bacteria. For example, humans, we have about 27,000 genes, but researchers estimate there are at least 2 million genes in the gut in all the bacteria. And these bacteria do lots of things for us. They feed the lining of our gut, the very inner lining of your colon. Those cells depend on a fair amount of their nutrition from the bacteria that digest these things and make little short-chain fatty acids, and they kind of feed them to those cells. The other thing that's really exciting in the research is how the microbiome seems to relate to inflammation. And as Chris is talking about insulin resistance and inflammation, it kind of fits right in there that the microbiome has some role in the regulation of energy expenditure, inflammation, and kind of a regulation of our inflammatory system. And so what's exciting about that from a nutritional perspective and from a mental health perspective is it expands our interventions, and it begins to lead to ideas of like, okay, if we can help shape someone's gut microbiome to protect them from depression or anxiety, or can we shape someone's diet in a way that promotes more growth of bacteria that we know are really related to health? And it's where we are. There have been a few studies that look really exciting. One of them was of patients with bipolar disorder with acute mania that were given a probiotic. So this is how we often try to shape the microbiome. And it found that there was a prevention of rehospitalization with mania with individuals who got a probiotic supplement. So it's new data, and I think we're really learning in clinical practice what to do with this. I can tell you in our clinic, it's really helped motivate us and keep us really with our eyes on the prize about helping our patients and partnering with them to eat more fermented foods and eat more plants, because there's a lot of, focus on probiotics and probiotic supplements. And at the end of the day, we really see our role as helping people really nourish their mental health and feed their mental health. And we think you do that best with food.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris, you have been doing pioneering work in the use of the ketogenic diet for the treatment of serious psychiatric disorders. Can you tell us about your research and findings with this regard to this type of therapy? I know social media has done the works talking about keto diet. It's great. It's awful. It's this, it's that. And I would love to hear it personally from you.
So you're already well-versed in the ketogenic diet. It is definitely probably the most controversial and polarizing diet in 2021. The thing that's fascinating to most people is, most people have heard of it as a weight loss diet. Most people think of it as a fad diet. It was actually developed precisely 100 years ago to this year by a physician. And it was developed specifically not for weight loss, not as the latest fad diet. It was developed specifically to stop seizures in people who have epilepsy. And it turns out that we have 100 years of clinical evidence, and this is an evidence-based treatment for epilepsy. And it actually works when all else fails. So when people with epilepsy have tried lots and lots of medications and none of them have worked to stop their seizures, this diet can actually stop their seizures. It doesn't work in 100% of people, but it works in probably about 2/3 of people who try it. So we actually know more about the science of the ketogenic diet and its effects on the brain than any other dietary intervention. That includes things like omega-3 fatty acid supplements. It includes the Mediterranean diet. It includes vegan or vegetarian diets. And that's shocking to most people. And again, the reason is because this has been used by neurologists and neuroscientists for 100 years. And so biotech companies, neurology researchers, all sorts of people have been studying this diet, trying to figure out what on earth is this doing? How is it stopping seizures when all of our great pills aren't working? And so for those of you, we're talking about mental health. For those of you familiar with the mental health field, we use epilepsy treatments every day in psychiatry in tens of millions of people. So if you may not know it, but if you recognize medications like Depakote, Tegretol, Lamictal, Topamax, Neurontin or gabapentin, and all of the benzos, so that includes Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, all of those are anti-epileptic medications. And what do we use them for? We use them broadly for just about everything in psychiatry. We use them for bipolar disorder, for schizophrenia. We use them for anxiety, for depression, for eating disorders, for substance use disorders, for just about everything that ails you in the mental health field. And so given that this diet is an effective anticonvulsant and it works when all else fails, it just makes sense to think about using it in mental disorders. And in fact, the science of what we know that this diet is doing, this diet is having effects on neurotransmitters, on hormones, on the gut microbiome. It's decreasing brain inflammation. It's having a lot of really powerful effects that we are fairly certain should possibly play a role for people with mental disorders.
Wow, I did not know any of that. So leave it to social media to take something that is aggressively helping with seizures and be like, you want to lose weight fast? Slap on the keto diet with no sense of history whatsoever. So thank you for breaking that down for me and those listening, because not talked about enough. Guest reminder, we are talking today about diet, nutrition, and mental health with Dr. Chris Palmer, Director of the Department of Postgraduate and Continuing Education at McLean Hospital and an Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. We also have Dr. Drew Ramsey, Assistant Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at Columbia College. Let's start that over. Dr. Drew Ramsey, Assistant Clinical Professor of Psychiatry at Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons. He's also the author of several books, including Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Viewers, don't forget, we want to hear from you. Feel free to post questions, comments, or thoughts for our guests at any time. And if you know anyone who can benefit from today's program, please share this webcast with them. So, Drew, we're going to come on back to you. You're also an organic farmer. So what inspired your interest in food and what led you to want to go into this emerging area of psychiatry?
I grew up on a rural farm. Let me start that again. I grew up on a farm in rural Indiana. My folks were part of that Back to the Land movement. And so food has always really been central to our lives, and not just the growing of it, but the processing of it. And I think experiencing that really wonderful feeling. Anybody who's grown some of their own food knows just that satisfying feeling. You put seeds in the ground and take care of those plants, and they give you just a bounty of fresh produce. One of the things that I was really thrilled to see is I really started working in the field of nutritional psychiatry, almost 15 years ago, working on my first book, The Happiness Diet. There was this explosion in farmers markets. And I went from I did my training in New York. So I'm like this, like Indiana farm boy who moves to Manhattan. And it was a little challenging, right? People were like, where are you from? It's like, yeah, I'm sorry, where are you from? And all of a sudden though, it's like cool. It's like cool to be from a farm. It's like cool to know how to raise chickens. And that really helped me just in my own personal development of, there's such a kind of city country divide in our country, of understanding just the incredible importance of rural America and of our food supply, and it was really exciting to see this kind of farm to table movement come about. I think that's entirely why I really am one of the early nutritional psychiatrists, is that as I was in training in my own personal life, I was at that point eating a really strange diet. I was eating a really low-fat vegetarian diet. I was an athlete in college and just really curious about nutrition. It just struck me throughout medical school, I was like a weirdo. I was like a vegetarian. Like, there are no vegetarians in Indiana 25 years ago. And then in residency, it was like, strange, right? That you're focused on what you're eating. And it just, I don't know. It struck me as really odd that we know the brain burns more fuel than any other organ, but we never, ever ask our patients anything about what they eat. There's not a single hour of nutrition in psychiatric education. And, that's just not accurate or based on the evidence anymore. I don't think that's good for patients. I don't think that's good for psychiatry, right? That means the only reason you meet people like me and Chris is when you're really symptomatic and ill. You meet us when you're psychotic or you're suicidal or you've quote unquote hit rock bottom, as opposed to psychiatry really being fundamental to our public health. And that there are lots of ways that we can help your mental health without you ever meeting us. We can help you feed your mental health. We can help you make lifestyle choices that are better for your mental health. And so food for me really, and nutritional psychiatry has really allowed me to have my foot in both of my worlds, the world of really rural farms and all of the pleasures and challenges that come with that, and the world of psychiatry and all of the pleasures and challenges that come with that.
So Drew, I just have to interject. I had no idea you were from Indiana. I'm from Indiana too. So you got
gosh.
You got
I told you I feel like we had a lot in common. Chris, where are you from in Indiana, Hoosier?
Fort Wayne.
Oh my gosh.
I did not grow up on a farm, unlike Drew, but close enough. There are farms everywhere in Indiana. So
this is amazing. Like half of the nutritional psychiatrists in America are born in Indiana. That's really cool.
That is cool.
I love that. Chris, what inspired you to want to focus your work on new and innovative treatments for mental illnesses, and were you always interested in food as medicine?
So that's a great question. And the real answer is I've not always been interested in food as medicine. If you had asked me 20 years ago, do I think food could play a role in treating schizophrenia? I would have said absolutely not, no way. And let alone other diagnoses like depression or bipolar disorder or alcoholism or Alzheimer's disease. I would have said no. These are serious brain disorders. Like, they're genetic. They're related to neurotransmitters and hormones. That has nothing to do with food. I think the thing that led me on this path and the thing that most inspired me is kind of a sad kind of observation about our field. And I don't say this to bash the mental health field. I'm a mental health professional. I am committed to mental health education. I'm committed to the mental health field and all of the treatments that we have to offer, including medication, psychotherapy, and everything else. But the reality check is that our treatments fail to work for far too many people. That is just the real answer. That even with the best treatments that we have to offer, pills, therapy, ECT, whatever, the majority of people who seek treatment for mental health problems end up with chronic disorders. That means that their symptoms can get better with treatment, sometimes for a year or two, or maybe even 5 or 10 years. But more often than not, the symptoms come back. And we need to change pills, we need to increase doses, we need to do something. And, and I think the strongest testaments to this, or if you look at like the serious mental disorders, like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, it's not a surprise to anybody. The overwhelming majority of those people do not get better, even with the best treatments we have to offer. But the reality is, even a bread and butter diagnosis like major depression is now the leading cause of disability in the United States and on planet Earth. And those people are getting treatment. They are getting treatment and they are disabled. And there are more people in the United States and on this planet unable to work, unable to go to school, unable to function in life because of depression than any other medical diagnosis. This is all of medicine. This includes heart attacks, strokes, Alzheimer's disease, cancer, all of them. Depression disables more people. Why? Because at the end of the day, our treatments aren't working well enough for the majority of people. And so I am very passionate about understanding the science of what is causing mental illness and how can we develop more effective interventions.
Thank you for your honesty. As someone with major depressive disorder, unfortunately, that does surprise me, but it also doesn't. And I definitely can kind of resonate with a lot of that. Is there evidence that certain foods can alleviate symptoms of depression or anxiety or both? And this can go for both of you.
I think for sure there's evidence. I mean, there's strong correlational data. Let's just start there. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but the trials range from some of my favorite, the Sun Navarro study by Dr. Amu Sanchez Villegas, looked at 10,000 university students, followed them for 4.5 years, and found that those who ate most like their grandparents, most like a Mediterranean diet, these were Spanish university students, they had a 30 to 50% protection from getting diagnosed with depression over 4.5 years. And the reduction in protection was like 30 to 50% reduced rate of depression. If you take all those correlational studies and you put them together, one meta-analysis found there was about an 18.2% reduction in the overall risk of depression in a population for those who ate a more kind of traditional style diet or whole foods diet, but basically not eating highly processed foods. So that data was okay. That got us all excited, but nothing really popped until we had those randomized clinical trials, starting with the SMILES trial by Felice Jacka that showed a 33.2% reduction. 32.3% of, let me just start that again. The SMILES trial by Felice Jacka, it showed that individuals who are in treatment, many of them already in treatment, that 32.3% went into full remission from their depression by adding on a Mediterranean style diet. They did that with 7 dietary counseling sessions. That study is then followed up another randomized trial looking at a group Mediterranean style cooking class with 152 people in this trial. It found that there was a significant reduction. There was a 45% reduction in mood rating scales. So just imagine your depression getting, reducing the severity by half. And to note, in that trial, 86% of the patients had severe or extremely severe depression. Because I think so often we think about food like, oh, it's for mild depression. And as Chris is saying, I think why we're both so passionate about this is we really need to reorient ourselves and get away from this argument that it's like meds versus therapy or meds versus food. And our field is about getting people better. And food is a huge part of that. Lifestyle is a huge part of that. And the more that we can use this data to motivate patients and motivate clinicians to really focus on feeding the human brain, I think the better we're going to do. I think the better chance we have of this is one thing that psychiatry doesn't want to win. We don't want to be the number one cause of disability in the world, our illnesses. And I think Chris and I are both really motivated to try and help change that with food.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I'll just add to it that the issues are actually really complicated. A lot of times people talk about or hear like Mediterranean diet. So that means if we eat a healthy diet, we'll have a healthy body and healthy brain. But it's actually more than that. So it's about including what we consider healthy foods. It's about eliminating what we might consider foods that are harmful to us, to our metabolism, to our gut microbiome, to our brains. And it's about the right balance for different people. And different people need different diets. Like young growing children need a different diet than somebody who's morbidly obese. And those people need a different diet than somebody who's anorexic and emaciated. And
it's such an important point. I think one of those fundamental tenets of nutritional psychiatry, which is around how people so often think globally about like, is the keto diet good or bad? Is the Mediterranean diet good or bad for me? And why I love being a nutritional psychiatrist is I'm really interested in helping patients eat in a way that feels really good to them. Some of those people choose diets that, might not be my top choice, but it's their preference. And as a psychiatrist, I feel like my job is to help people really evolve their eater identity. And to help them with the science, some of the diets, for example, the ketogenic diets you're doing, where there's some specific data. I'm like, hey, this might seem like an extreme diet, but there's really interesting data about your brain metabolism and your psychotic disorder, and this might help. To helping patients with depression by just adding in more fermented foods and seafood and plants, and as you say, cutting out those highly processed foods.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so. In my mind, I think that's one of the most important points to try to stress about nutritional psychiatry. A lot of times people are just looking for the soundbite, like, so tell me what to do and I'll do it and that should fix me, right? It's like, well, no, it's kind of like medications. Can medications play a role? Yes. Well, if you've got a certain diagnosis, you don't get to just ask me, so tell me what medicine I should take and that'll fix me, right? It's like, well, no, I need to know a lot more about you. I need to know your diagnosis. I need to know, side effects. We need to titrate the dose for you specifically. And dietary interventions, I look at dietary interventions in the same way. That we might start with one intervention. If it doesn't work, we might move on to a different intervention. If one intervention kind of sort of works, we might increase the potency of that intervention. We might change the intervention, and sometimes we need to change the intervention as time goes on. So like with a ketogenic diet, I tell most people, this is not a lifelong intervention. In the epilepsy world, a lot of patients will be on the diet for anywhere from 2 to 5 years, and then they transition off of it, and they usually remain seizure-free. So if the diet stops their seizures,
I think there's something about the ketogenic state and the kind of lower inflammation over time that the brain kind of repairs in a way that leads to fewer seizures even when they're off ketogenic diet. That's fascinating.
Yeah, no, and we have an abundance of basic scientific evidence on this, and it stimulates this process in the body and the brain called autophagy, which in layman's terms is kind of a healing process or repair process or waste disposal process. You can think about it in any of those ways. And the ketogenic diet can stimulate that process. And so when people are on the diet, the brain actually does seem to be undergoing a healing process and a waste disposal process. It is not definitive for everyone. Again, so some people have needed to stay on a ketogenic diet to control their seizures for 40 years, because every time they try to go off the diet, the seizures come right back. So they're stuck on the diet. But other people, that healing process seems to be enough for anywhere from 2 to 5 years, that they just do it for 2 to 5 years, their brain heals itself, and then they can go on their merry way and eat whatever diet they want and remain seizure-free. And so I think those are the kind of really hopeful things about dietary interventions, is that we might actually be able, so I don't use the word cure. Some people would use the word cure for that. And I'm really, being a scientist, really loath to put myself out there and use that kind of controversial term. But I will certainly use the word remission. And it can put people into complete remission of their symptoms and allow them to go on and live essentially happily ever after, which is what we're all looking for.
So out of curiosity for both of you, could the microbiome be regulated through medication?
The microbiome is already the microbiome is already regulated through medication. If you look at, there have been a number of trials looking at one of the antipsychotics, Risperdal, and a significant impact on the microbiome. Certainly, and anything you take into your body, and in some ways, if you think about it expansively, the microbiome isn't just the gut. I mean, we are covered in microbes. So every time you shake a hand, every time you pick up a piece of dirt, anytime you eat some yogurt or go to a foreign country and eat a fermented food, you're affecting the microbiome. I think it's one of the ways that we're going to learn a lot about our interventions, probably some about how they work. I mean, we know that a number of antidepressants are quite anti-inflammatory in their action. We also know there have been these really interesting meta-analyses that look at when you take an antidepressant and you add on an anti-inflammatory, really any type of anti-inflammatory. In some studies, you almost double the efficacy of that antidepressant. And so medications certainly affect the microbiome. I think there's a lot of, there's been a lot of push. And there hasn't been that kind of holy grail yet in the research, a big push to find what are the specific strands that we could inoculate people with, that they could then support with more fiber and more plants in their diet that would make an impact over time on mental health. There have been a few studies showing, but mostly they're of probiotics, showing, for example, acute decreased anxiety by increasing the number or the amount of lactobacillus bacteria in the gut. There are a handful of studies like that. There haven't been any big long-term studies of microbiome interventions or probiotics, to my knowledge, that have shown a significant impact on depression or anxiety yet. But I think everybody is looking at that and looking to connect this up, for us to probably elevate ourselves and our thinking around mental health. Not so much, we're going to give this like singular pill, or we're going to give this little, microbiome bug, but that understanding how inflammation works in an individual's bodies, understanding their genetic vulnerabilities to mental illnesses, and then understanding, more of the tools that we have. So we're a field that really has more than just talk therapy and medications. I think that's what people are hoping for from our field, and I think that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would just add to it that in addition to some medications maybe positively affecting the microbiome, we have an abundance of evidence that some medications adversely affect the microbiome. That the biggest culprit are antibiotics. So not only when you take antibiotics for whatever you might have, and I'm not anti-antibiotic, if you've got a really bad bacterial infection and you need antibiotics, by all means, take them. You could die. Don't not take them. But if you've got a cold from a virus, please don't go asking for antibiotics, because they aren't going to do anything and they might actually hurt your gut microbiome. But more importantly, like if you're eating animal sourced foods, so any meat, poultry, fish, any milk, dairy, those animals are pumped full of antibiotics, unless you're on an organic farm. Those animals are pumped full of antibiotics. And guess what? All of those antibiotics end up in the meat and in the milk and in the dairy products. And so when you eat non-organic, animal sourced foods, you're getting a lot of antibiotics, whether you know it or not.
This last question is for both of you. And it's also for those that are listening. There's no shortage of advice out there about or regarding the microbiome and diet, and there's it's not so simple to say that brain health is all about food, but how can consumers make small adjustments in their diet based on the science while keeping in mind that any one diet is not a miracle cure?
My answer is just self-promotional. I mean, I think you should check out my book, because that's exactly what I tried to do in Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. And in our e-courses, we really try to break things down using the clinical method we've developed of just helping people focus on major food groups and make small changes to have small wins. So when I meet with patients and our team meets with patients clinically, in addition to a psychiatric history, we take a food history where we want to know not just what you eat, but we want to know who you are as an eater and kind of where you came from as an eater. Did you grow up in a house that sat around the dinner table? Did you grow up in a house that was really struggling with food security? Did you grow up in a house that was vegetarian? Like, what did you learn about food and about nourishing yourself? And I would say the first step we really ask people is to, again, take a step back, because I find so often when I meet people, they're kind of wondering whether the latest Instagram influencer is really got it dialed in, and they should go ketogenic, or they should start drinking celery juice, or they should take this special supplement that no one's ever heard of. And I kind of ask, like, is that how you want to be in the world as an eater? Does that feel good to you? Because it feels like you're really at the whim of that expert who probably isn't that much of an expert. I mean, I think Chris and I are two of the top experts in this field, and you don't hear us whipping off a big list of our favorite foods, because while we have those, and there are probably a lot of foods we recommend, we're both really interested, I think, in eaters and in dietary pattern and in meeting patients where they are. So we have a little Ryan, seafood, greens, nuts and beans. I'm a little dark chocolate. And as I listen to someone's eating kind of pattern, I'm looking for those high yield foods. I'm looking for sort of the meat and the deli meats and the highly processed foods and the sugars and the stuff that we want to try and edge out. And I'm thinking, where can there be a win in this treatment? Is there somebody, like, I remember treating a woman who told me she was a vegan, and we're talking about diet, and there's some concerns with that diet. She was supplementing herself well, and then I said something about seafood, and she said, "Well, do mussels count?" I said, "Yeah, mussels are like, and oysters are one of the best foods for your brain." She said, "Oh, well, I eat those. I eat those all the time. They're part of my, she's from a European culture. They're part of my culture. We love mussels." And it was one of those moments where someone's primary way of identifying themselves and eating most of the time, which was no animal products, actually included some bivalves. And just, I think, a good example of, as I said, meeting people where they are, understanding who they are as an eater, but then helping them make small steps to increase the nutrient density in their diet, more leafy greens, more fermented foods. And then I like to get really specific. Like, I had a patient yesterday who likes seafood, has seafood in her freezer, likes the way she feels when she eats seafood, never makes seafood. And I said, well, what is that? Like, does it stink up the house? And she said, I just don't really feel I have a recipe that I feel confident in. And I said, all right. So actually we're going to put on a cooking class, perfectly cooked wild salmon for her, because I remember feeling this way. I didn't eat any fish and seafood when I was a resident. I started learning about this data. And I think helping people acquire skills, recipes, expanding their palate is a really wonderful, but also somewhat delicate work. And I think a lot of times we're so blunt, it's like, cut out all the carbs or cut out all the processed foods, as opposed to, I like to say, Laurie, have you eaten sunflower sprouts?
What was that?
Have you eaten sunflower sprouts?
I have not.
All right. Well, they're, I think, just one of the, even though I'm a big kale promoter and the kale mafia has me under their thumb, having launched natural kale and 50 Shades of Kale. Don't tell the kale guys I told this, but sunflower sprouts are amazing. They're just the diploid little 2-leaf sprout of the sunflower. They're really succulent green. They've got actually lots of protein in them, and they're amazing with olive oil and lemon juice. And if you've never eaten them, I think it'd be really interesting. I bet this is kind of how the universe works. I bet you're going to see them somewhere at your grocery store or at a salad bar in a salad. And I'm really excited for you to try them and introduce them to your palate and see what you think. And so that's a little bit, we try to kind of, if you want to hear about the other leafy greens you like. And when people think we mean salad, we then look at all of the ways that we help people eat leafy greens, like pesto or in their smoothies or making kale chips or in soups and stews. Because I think a lot of times when people think eating healthy and eating more plants, they think all we're talking about is big salads. And we're talking about eating more plants, and salad's one way, but that's not my favorite way to eat plants. And so that's how we try and help people. And for everyone listening, that's how I'd like you to maybe try and take some steps this week of just thinking about some of these major categories: seafood, look for the processed foods, think about fermented foods, rainbow vegetables, leafy greens, nuts and beans, and see what you can do to increase the quantity of those in your diet. And does it affect at all how you're feeling?
I've always thought of eating more vegetables as eating salad, pretty much right up until you said that. So you mentioned pesto, and I was like, wait a second, this makes sense.
Pesto's awesome. There's so much greens. Or saute those greens. I'm looking at that big bowl of salad. I was like, God, I don't have the energy to chew all that. It's like, saute that stuff with some olive oil and garlic, and it's like, shoo. It's like 3 bites.
Yeah. That is very exciting. Thank you so much. Finally, we've come to the lightning round. We have 5 questions, quick answers, 1 person at a time. So it's,
are we scoring this? Is it like best out of 5?
Oh, no, it's not a
Okay.
score.
All right. Chris is pretty smart. I was a little worried there. Okay. All right.
Chris, we'll start off with you. Okay, so our first question is, what helps you cope when you are going through a hard time mentally?
Probably the best thing is exercise for me.
What song or type of music do you turn to when you're feeling down?
So I am a romantic, and this will probably piss people off, but I like those sad, sappy love songs when I'm feeling down. Yeah.
Name one. You got to name one.
I Need to Be in Love by Karen Carpenter.
Love that for you. Yes. When you need a quick boost of energy, which food do you turn to?
So there's probably not any one specific food. I tend to focus more on protein though. So I find that like really dense carbs might help in the short run, but slow me down later. So I tend to go for protein. But so I might use a protein shake. I might use turkey kind of slices and just roll them up, put mustard on them or something like that.
What is the number one change you'd like to see in the way people think about food?
I think it's what we've been talking about, that diet and foods are complicated. And if you're looking for a one-size-fits-all recommendation, it's probably not going to work for you. And that doesn't mean that changing diet or dietary interventions can't play a role in your overall health and mental health.
And our last question, what gives you hope?
I think a lot of this work that we've been talking about, working on the connections, for me, I'm particularly focused on what we call metabolism and how that impacts brain function, and the role of food on what we call metabolism. And I actually think this work has been going on for decades. And I think the mental health field is about to experience a revolution in the next few years in terms of how we understand and how we treat mental illness. And I think that is so hopeful for me, because I have seen people suffer from chronic disorders that have ruined their lives for decades. And it's about time we come up with better answers for them.
Thank you so much for answering those. All right, Drew, are you ready?
I'm ready.
What helps you cope when you're going through a tough time mentally?
My wife, or my emotional support horse. It's like, or ideally both my wife and my emotional support horse. That's the ideal. That's ideal.
That's amazing. What song or type of music do you turn to when you're feeling down?
I play Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah on the piano really, really loud.
That sounds really nice. When you need a quick boost of energy, which food do you turn to?
I turn to dark chocolate or a handful of nuts. And I really find often when I need a boost of energy, it means that I'm a little dehydrated. And I find like a big glass of mineral water, cold mineral water, like incredibly energizing.
What is the number one change you'd like to see in the way people think about food?
I'd like people to understand the power that their fork has and the importance that their choices at the table, or the importance that their food choices have in terms of their mental health.
And our last one, what gives you hope?
I've been thinking about this one for a little bit. I think hope's a little hard to come by in 2021. Let's say everybody being in so many transitions and it really feeling like such a year of so much change and calamity but I would say that throughout this process, what's been giving me hope is human connection. I just find that the more that I stay connected to people, the more that I find people connecting with me and with our team and reaching out and kind of encouraging this type of work. I find that just giving me an incredible amount of hope that the revolution that Chris is talking about, that I agree is coming. Right? We're diagnosing and treating people fundamentally the same way in mental health that we were 30 years ago. And as Chris has noted really bluntly and honestly in this interview, which I really like, because there's no reason for us to cut any corners on this. We just aren't getting as many people better, and we aren't preventing mental health disorders at the rate that we need to or that we could. And it gives me hope to think that human connection, that us connecting, that this conversation, that everyone listening, that's going to do something, that's going to be one little ripple that helps create the wave of change that we need.
Thank you both so much for chatting with me today. This was wonderful. I think everybody listening and watching are going to get a lot out of this. I know I have learned so much, so thank you for sharing your brains with me and with all the viewers.
Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, Laurie, thank you. And thank you so much, Chris. I love that we're both Hoosiers, and I hope you're listening, learn something. And most importantly, I hope when you look at your fork at your next meal, you just think about it a little differently.
Absolutely. Now for our mental health app pick of the week, a review from our team at One Mind Cyber Guide.
Hello, my name is John Bunny, and I'm a digital mental health specialist at One Mind Cyber Guide. We spend lots of time talking to people about mental health apps, what they like about them and what they don't like about them. In our research, we've heard from lots of people that one barrier to using mental health apps are concerns about privacy and security. This is understandable, as in some cases you might be entering sensitive, private information about your well-being, which you don't want other people to see. Just like any other technology you use, you should only use apps you trust and are confident in their ability to protect your data. Any app you use should have a privacy policy that informs you about how the app handles your data. In a recent study, we found that over half of apps for depression don't have a privacy policy. You can check for a policy in the App Store at the bottom of the app page. If an app doesn't have a policy or you are unsure of the security of the app, avoid using it. At One Mind Cyber Guide, we review privacy policies to check if key pieces of information about what happens to your data are covered in the policy. We believe developers should be as transparent as possible about how they handle data, so you can make informed choices about the apps you use. MindMax aims to help people build and strengthen a resilient mind. There are 4 main sections of the homepage: Train, Community, Gym, and Me. Share opens a community forum where you can share any of your achievements or thoughts with other MindMax community members. Train allows you to choose lessons and informational modules to build resilience and well-being. There are 8 training sessions available that you can complete in any order. The Gym section provides exercises and games to help with mental well-being. Me allows you to update your avatar, view progress and activities, and update personal settings or privacy settings. MindMax was developed by the Australian Football League with funding from the Movember Foundation, a nonprofit which looks at mental health through a male lens, focusing on prevention, early intervention, and health promotion. We've reviewed MindMax at One Mind Cyber Guide, where it scores a 2.0 out of 5 for credibility and 4.12 out of 5 for user experience. Stay tuned next week for another app review.
Thank you so much, Cyber Guide team. Thank you to Dr. Chris Palmer and Dr. Drew Ramsey. Viewers, thank you too. Don't forget you can post questions and also check out all of our Brainwaves episodes at onemind.org/brainwaves. Bye everybody, have a great day and stay safe.
Every day trying to find the strength. I just want things to go back to normal.
Science is racing to find treatments for the virus. Vaccines are on the horizon.
I don't know what to do.
But what about the mental health research needed to sustain our lives during and after the crisis? One Mind is funding the science to revolutionize treatments and provide hope. One Mind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.